When I opened the door to my house, after a 36-hour shift at City General Hospital, all I wanted was a hot shower and something to eat. But what I found was a second refrigerator, sleek and modern, installed right next to my old one. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, looked at me with that cold smile I knew so well. "This one's mine," she said, crossing her arms. "From now on, buy your own food." It was then that I noticed the yellow sticky notes on all the groceries I had bought just 3 days earlier. My name wasn't on any of them. They conveniently forgot they were living in my house without paying a cent of rent. What came next made them wake up crying. But before we continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. My name is Eleanor. I'm 65 years old, and I've been the head nurse in the ER at the hospital for almost 4 decades. That day, my feet were aching inside the white clogs that were once new. My body was a map of aches and pains back, knees, shoulders, marks of a life dedicated to caring for others. I dropped my bag on the kitchen island, still trying to understand what was happening. The new refrigerator had a stainless steel sheen that seemed to mock my old white fridge, which worked perfectly fine. The smell of something baking filled my nostrils, but instead of comfort, it only brought confusion. "Chloe, what does this mean?" I asked, my voice sounding hoarser than I expected. She adjusted her perfectly dyed hair and walked over to the new fridge. "It's simple, Eleanor. This fridge is mine, that one is yours. What's in mine is mine. What's in yours is yours." She opened the door of the new appliance with a theatrical flourish. "See? All organized." It was then I noticed the yellow sticky notes plastered on every item inside my own refrigerator. Cheese, milk, eggs, vegetables, all with Chloe written in big, black letters. "But I bought all of this 3 days ago," I murmured, feeling a lump forming in my throat. "Exactly. And now it's properly identified." She smiled, that smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm tired of sharing what's mine. So from now on, everyone buys their own." I felt my body tremble, not from fear, but from a cold rage rising up my spine. I bought that food with money from my job. Money I earned holding the hands of dying patients, cleaning wounds, comforting devastated families. All while my daughter-in-law and my son lived under my roof without contributing a single cent. "Does Ethan know about this?" I asked, referring to my son. As if summoned by his name, Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. At 35 years old, my only son was the spitting image of the father he lost when he was just 10. But in that moment, I didn't recognize the boy I had raised in his eyes. "Yeah, I know, Mom," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Chloe's right. It's better to organize things this way. Everyone handles their own stuff." I just stood there, caught between my son and his wife, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The house I paid for myself, working double shifts for years. The house where I mourned the death of my husband, Richard. The house where I bandaged Ethan's scraped knees, where I celebrated his graduations, where I comforted him through every broken heart. "I understand," was all I could say before retreating to my room. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at my hands. Rough hands with prominent veins, marked by time and constant work. Hands that held my son when he was born, that wiped his tears, that paid every bill for this house. That night, I didn't cry. Something inside me had changed. Through the window, I watched the full moon bathe the backyard in its silver light, the same backyard I planted alone after Richard died, leaving me with a young son and a mortgage to pay. I didn't sleep. My mind was working, cataloging every moment, every sacrifice, every extra shift to ensure Ethan had the best. Every time I stopped myself from buying something I wanted so he could have new clothes, SAT prep classes, a laptop for college. And now there he was, a grown man, allowing his wife to treat me like an intruder in my own kitchen. The next morning, I woke up early. I made my coffee in silence, using the grounds that, miraculously, hadn't yet earned a sticky note with Chloe's name. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Ethan did his homework for years, and I made a decision. I picked up my phone and called my friend Margaret, a retired lawyer I'd met when she was my patient years ago. "I need your help," I said as soon as she answered. "It's about my house here in Chicago. Margaret listened silently as I recounted the events of the previous night. When I finished, she sighed. "Eleanor, you have two paths, confrontation or strategy. Which do you prefer?" "I want my house back," I replied with a determination I hadn't felt in years, "and I want them to understand the value of respect." "Then let's be strategic," she said firmly. 3 days passed. Days where I kept my routine, leaving for work, returning exhausted, watching Chloe and Ethan enjoy everything I had built. The new fridge glowed with expensive meals, wines, imported cheeses, and fine cuts of meat, while mine held only the basics I could buy with the little money I had left after paying all the house bills that, conveniently, were all in my name. On the 4th night, I came home from the hospital early. I found Ethan and Chloe watching television in the living room, laughing loudly, eating popcorn from a large bowl popcorn made in my microwave, in a bowl from my porcelain collection. "Good evening," I said, stopping at the doorway. They glanced at me briefly, murmured a disinterested hey, and turned their attention back to the TV. It was in that moment I realized. This wasn't just about food or a refrigerator. It was about respect. It was about gratitude. It was about recognizing sacrifice. And it was also in that moment that I decided. It was time to show them the true taste of the independence they so desperately wanted. The next morning, Thursday, I didn't go to work. For the first time in years, I called the hospital and requested a personal day. Sandra, my shift colleague, was surprised but didn't question it. I rarely missed a day, even when I was sick. I waited for Ethan and Chloe to leave, he for another job interview that never panned out, she for the nail salon she frequented religiously every week, spending money she didn't have. When the house fell silent, I began my plan. First, I went to my room and pulled out a box of documents I kept in the back of the closet. In it was the deed to the house, payment stubs, receipts for the kitchen, remodel, everything that proved every inch of this place had been earned with my sweat. Among the papers, I also found something I hadn't seen in a long time. A loan agreement signed by Ethan 5 years ago. When he turned 30 and decided he wanted to start his own business, he came to me asking for money. At that time, I sacrificed my retirement savings $50,000 that took me decades to save. "It's an investment, Mom," he'd said with bright eyes. "In 2 years, I'll pay you back, with interest." The business, a high-end audio store, failed in less than 1 year. The money vanished, and Ethan never mentioned the subject again. And I, like the mother I had always been, never pressed him for it. I thought he felt bad enough about the failure. But now, holding that document, I realized that perhaps my leniency had been a mistake. Perhaps, by not demanding accountability, I had helped create the ungrateful man my son had become. I scanned the contract and sent it to Margaret, along with all the other important documents. Then, I did a detailed accounting of all the household expenses for the last 2 years. Water, electricity, high-speed internet, property taxes, maintenance, insurance, groceries, all paid exclusively by me, while I supported 2 adults perfectly capable of working. Next, I went into Ethan and Chloe's room. I knew I shouldn't be in there, but I needed to better understand what was happening. On Chloe's nightstand, I found bank statements for a joint account I didn't know about. Glancing quickly, I saw regular deposits coming from her mother's account, a wealthy woman who lived abroad. Chloe was receiving a generous allowance every month, money that was clearly not being used to contribute to the household expenses. In a desk drawer, I found something even worse. A real estate flyer, a Zillow listing for houses for sale in our very neighborhood. One of them was circled, with notes about financing scribbled in the margin. In Chloe's handwriting, I read, "When we sell the old woman's house, her part, 30%. Our part, 70%. Beside it, detailed calculations on how much they could get from the sale of my house. My house? And how they would use the money to buy a new property, leaving me with only a fraction of its value. My heart pounded. It wasn't just the labels on the fridge. It was a complete plan to take what was mine, to discard me when I was no longer useful. And my son was in on it. I took photos of everything with my phone and put the papers back exactly where I found them. I left their room feeling betrayed, but strangely stronger. The rage had given way to resolve. My next stop was the office of an old friend, Charles, an accountant I knew from when he handled the hospital's finances. I showed him the documents and the unpaid loan. What would be the current value, with interest and adjustments? I asked. Charles did some calculations on his machine. Based on standard legal interest, it would be about $72,000 today. $72,000. Enough for me to make a fresh start away from them, if it came to that. And if I wanted to collect this legally? Charles looked at me over his glasses. Are you sure, Eleanor? We're talking about your son. I'm sure he's my son. What I'm not sure of is if he still remembers that. Before I left, Charles gave me the name of a lawyer specializing in family and real estate law. If you need to go down that road, Arthur is the best. I returned home with time to spare. I went to the supermarket and bought a large amount of groceries, not basics, but specialty items I knew Ethan and Chloe enjoyed. Imported blue cheese that she adored, craft beer that he collected, Belgian chocolate, exotic fruits. At home, I began preparing an elaborate dinner, a pot roast, which had been my son's favorite recipe since childhood, accompanied by roasted potatoes and steamed vegetables. I also made a sophisticated dessert, tiramisu, which Chloe always praised when we ate at restaurants. I set the table with my best china, crystal glasses from my wedding registry, and cloth napkins. I put fresh flowers in the center and lit candles. Ethan and Chloe arrived just as I was finishing the preparations. I saw the astonishment in their eyes when they saw the table set, when they smelled the aroma of the food. "What is this, Mom?" Ethan asked, confused. "A special dinner," I replied with a serene smile. "I thought we could talk." Chloe seemed suspicious, but the smell of the food and the sight of the set table seemed to have calmed her slightly. Smells good," she commented, leaning in to look at the roast. "Go get cleaned up and come eat," I suggested. "Everything is ready." While they went upstairs to change, I finished setting the table. Under each plate, I placed an envelope. In Ethan's, the loan agreement, updated with the amount owed. In Chloe's, copies of the photos I took of her plans to sell my house, and at my own place, I put a third envelope. A formal notification, drafted by Arthur, the lawyer, giving them a 30-day notice to vacate the property. The table was set, not just for dinner, but for the moment of truth that was about to come. I poured myself a glass of wine and waited, feeling a strange calm. The bitter taste I had felt for the past few days had transformed into a quiet determination. It was time for them to learn that respect isn't put on yellow sticky notes. Respect is earned, it is cultivated, and when it is lost, it can have bitter consequences. Ethan and Chloe came down the stairs laughing about something I couldn't hear. They seemed relaxed, as if the world belonged to them. The sound of their laughter, which should have warmed my mother's heart, now caused me a mixture of sadness and indignation. How could my son be so oblivious to what he was doing to me? "Wow, Mom, is all this for us?" Ethan asked, sitting down at the table. His eyes gleamed at the abundance of food. Chloe sat beside him, adjusting the expensive dress she wore around the house as if it were casual clothing. "Yes," I replied softly. "I thought we deserved a special night." "Any particular occasion?" Chloe asked suspiciously, taking the linen napkin and placing it on her lap. "Let's just say it's a celebration of new beginnings," I replied, pouring an expensive Merlot I had bought, especially for the occasion, into their glasses. "Serve yourselves, please." Ethan didn't need a second invitation. He filled his plate with generous portions of the pot roast and side dishes. Chloe followed, though with more restraint, always concerned with appearances. We ate in silence for a few minutes, just the clinking of silverware on the plates filling the room. "This is delicious, Mom," Ethan finally commented, already on his second helping. "It's been a while since you made this roast." "It's been a while since we had a reason to celebrate," I replied, barely touching my food. The anxiety about what was coming next had stolen my appetite. Chloe noticed my behavior. She was always observant, a quality that could be admirable if it weren't primarily used to manipulate situations in her favor. "You're acting strange, Eleanor," she said, setting down her fork. "What's really going on?" I took a sip of wine, feeling the liquid warm my throat, giving me courage. "I've been thinking a lot since the refrigerator episode." Ethan had the decency to look ashamed, but Chloe maintained her neutral, almost defiant expression. "And I've come to a conclusion. I continued. You're both right. This surprised them. They exchanged quick glances, as if trying to decipher where I was going with this. Everyone should handle their own things. It's fair, it's organized, and above all, it's adult. I took another sip of wine. That's why I prepared a surprise for you. A surprise? Ethan's voice had that childish tone of expectation I knew from when he was little. He always loved surprises, especially those involving gifts. Yes, it's under your plates. They looked at each other again, curious now. Ethan was the first to lift his plate, finding the brown envelope. Chloe followed his example, more cautiously. What is this? Ethan asked, opening the envelope. His face changed as he recognized the document in his hands. The loan agreement, with the updated balance highlighted in fluorescent yellow, the same color as the refrigerator labels. An intentional choice on my part. This is, Mom, this was 5 years ago. He stammered, turning pale. Exactly. 5 years, 2 months, and 17 days, to be precise, I replied calmly. Enough time for the interest to turn $50,000 into $72,000. Chloe snatched the paper from Ethan's hands, her eyes scanning the numbers rapidly. You can't be serious, she hissed. Oh, but I am. And you should check your envelope, Chloe. I'm sure you'll find it. Revealing. She tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. When she saw the photos of her own plans, her face flushed with rage and shame. You were snooping through our things? She accused, slamming her hands on the table, making the silverware rattle. Just like you snooped through my refrigerator, my groceries, my life. My voice remained calm, which only seemed to infuriate her more. Mom, we can talk about this, Ethan tried, his tone pleading. That business went south, you know that. I was planning to pay you back when you sold my house? I interrupted. When you kicked me out with my 30% share, as your wife so generously planned? Ethan looked at Chloe in shock. What is she talking about? Don't play dumb, Ethan, Chloe snapped. We talked about it. The house is too big for her alone. It would make more sense to sell it and each go our own way. But we never talked about percentages or… He stopped, realizing he was incriminating himself further. Or cheating me? I completed for him. Of taking what is rightfully mine, what I built alone after your father died, and left me with a young son and bills to pay. The silence that followed was heavy. No one was touching the food anymore. The pot roast was cooling on the plates, just like the atmosphere between us. And there's more, I finally said, picking up my own envelope. Since we're being so organized about what belongs to whom, I handed the document to Ethan. His hands were shaking as he opened it. Chloe craned her neck to read along with him. An eviction notice? He read, incredulous. Mom, you can't be serious. 30 days, I replied. The lawyer said that's more than fair, considering you have no formal lease agreement and do not contribute financially to the upkeep of the house. Chloe stood up abruptly, knocking over her wine glass. The red liquid seeped across the white tablecloth like blood. You can't do this. We're family. Family? I raised an eyebrow. Family respects each other. Family contributes. Family doesn't put labels on food they didn't pay for or make plans to sell the old woman's house, as you so affectionately call me behind my back. Ethan also stood up, his face a mask of desperation. Mom, please, let's talk. We don't need to get to this point. I remained seated, surprisingly calm. I'm tired of empty conversations, Ethan. I'm tired of being treated like a burden in my own home, of working to support two perfectly capable adults who show not the slightest gratitude or respect. This is all your fault, Chloe yelled at Ethan. You said your mom would never do this, that she always caved. And I always did cave, I confirmed. That was my mistake. I let you think you could take everything without giving anything in return. We can't leave in 30 days, Ethan argued, desperate. We have nowhere to go. Chloe's parents have that condo downtown that's sitting empty, I suggested. The one you mentioned when you were discussing shipping me off to a nursing home. Chloe's eyes widened. You heard that too? I've heard enough. I finally stood up, picking up my nearly untouched plate. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to retire. Feel free to finish dinner. After all, it was prepared with food I paid for with my money, in my kitchen. Enjoy it while you can. I walked to the kitchen door and turned one last time. Oh, and Ethan, that pot roast was always your favorite meal. But you never realized how much I hate making it. The smell sticks to my hands for days. But I did it anyway, because I loved you more than you will ever understand. I went up the stairs to my room, hearing the heated argument erupt between them. Accusations, recriminations, the sound of something else breaking. I didn't care. I closed my door, lay down on my bed, and for the first time in days, I slept deeply, with the clear conscience of someone who had finally taken back control of her own life. The next morning, I woke up to the sun streaming through the blinds. For a moment, I was confused about what had happened, as if it had all been just an intense dream. But then I heard doors slamming downstairs and agitated voices. Reality returned with full force. I got up, took a long shower, and dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel confident. Black trousers, a silk teal blouse, a pearl necklace Richard had given me on our last anniversary. I looked in the mirror and saw not just the tired nurse or the betrayed mother, but a woman determined to reclaim her dignity. I went downstairs slowly, each step an exercise in control. The kitchen was a mess. Dirty dishes from last night's dinner, wine stains on the tablecloth, leftover food. Apparently, no one had bothered to clean up. Ethan was sitting at the table, his head in his hands, looking like he hadn't slept. He raised his eyes when he saw me. "Mom," he began, his voice hoarse. "Good morning, Ethan," I replied neutrally, heading for the coffee maker. I made sure to scoop the coffee from the bag that had a yellow sticky note with Chloe's name on it, a small act of rebellion. "About last night." He tried again. "Where's Chloe?" I interrupted, preparing my cup. "She left early. Went to her parents' house." He hesitated. "We're in trouble, Mom." "I imagined so." I sat down across from him, holding my cup between us like a small barrier. 30 days isn't much time to find a new place. It's not just that. He looked genuinely distressed. "Chloe is furious. She says she's going to sue me if the house thing doesn't go through." "Sue you?" I raised an eyebrow. "The house is in my name, Ethan, exclusively." "I know, but..." He ran his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture. "We had plans. Promises. Plans made at my expense, without my knowledge or consent," I pointed out. "That holds no legal weight. But there's a bigger problem." He bit his lip, hesitant. "That money I loaned you, I have no way to pay it back." "That's not news," I replied calmly, taking a sip of coffee. "No, Mom, you don't understand." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "After the business failed, I got into some debt. I tried to win the money back with investments." I set my cup down. "What kind of investments?" "Gambling. Online betting." He couldn't look me in the eye. "I thought I could multiply the value quickly and pay you back, but you lost it all," I finished, a knot tightening in my chest. Not for the money itself, but for the revelation that my son had a problem I hadn't even suspected. "How long has this been going on?" 3 years, more or less, he confessed. "Chloe didn't know at first. When she found out, she was furious. That's when we started planning other alternatives, like convincing you to sell the house." He looked ashamed. "The idea was to pay off my debts with the sale money and buy a smaller place for the 3 of us." "For the 3 of us," I repeated, incredulous. "Even after planning to send me to a nursing home?" "That was Chloe's idea," he defended himself. "I never agreed with that. But you didn't overrule it either, apparently." I stood up, unable to sit any longer. "Ethan, how much exactly do you owe?" He mumbled a figure that made me sway. Almost $150,000 owed to banks, lenders, and betting platforms, an amount he could never hope to repay with the temporary jobs he occasionally landed. "That's why Chloe is so desperate," he explained. "The collectors, they started calling, showing up. She's scared." I leaned against the kitchen island, trying to process it all. My son wasn't just ungrateful, he was in deep trouble. And, somehow, I had become responsible for saving him yet again. "What do you plan to do?" I asked finally. "I don't know." For the first time since this conversation started, I saw tears in his eyes. "I'm scared, Mom." A part of me wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, that Mom would fix it all just like she always had. But that part was weakened by the betrayal, by the discovered plans, by the yellow sticky notes on the fridge. "I'm going to the hospital now," I announced, grabbing my purse. "I'm on duty until tomorrow. When I get back, I want you to have a plan, a real plan. No more fantasies about taking what's mine." "But Mom." "No, Ethan, no more, but Mom. You are 35 years old. If you're mature enough to rack up $150,000 in gambling debts, you're mature enough to find a solution." I left the house feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. On the way to the hospital, I called Margaret. "The problems are bigger than we imagined," I said as soon as she answered. "Tell me everything," she replied, and I did. "What should I do, Margaret?" "He's my son. I can't just abandon him." "No, you can't," she agreed. "But you also can't let yourself be dragged down into the hole he dug." I parked in the hospital garage, still on the phone. "I'm afraid of what will happen to him, Margaret. Gambling is an illness." "Yes, it is. And as a nurse, you know that some illnesses require specialized treatment, not just motherly care." Her words hit me with the force of truth. Throughout my career, I had guided families to seek professional help for their loved ones. Why was it so hard to follow my own advice? "I'll think about what to do," I said finally. "Thanks for listening." That shift was one of the hardest of my life. Not because of the medical emergencies, those I could handle with decades of experience. What was difficult was maintaining focus when my own life felt like it was falling apart. Between sutures and medications, my mind constantly returned to Ethan, to his debts, to the betrayal. Carol, my shift partner of over 20 years, noticed my distraction. "Eleanor, you're pale. Did something happen?" I hesitated for a moment. I was never one to share personal problems at work, but the weight was too much to carry alone. "Trouble at home," I admitted finally. "My son, he has gambling debts." Carol put a hand on my shoulder. "How much?" "150,000. She sucked in her breath. "And let me guess. You're trying to figure out how to save him." I nodded, ashamed. "Eleanor," she spoke with the firmness she used with difficult patience. "Do you remember that case last year? The young guy who came in here after being beaten by loan sharks? How could I forget? A man in his 30s, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. We fought for hours to save him. His mother paid off his debts 3 times, Carol continued. Each time, he promised to stop. Each time, he went right back to betting. Until she had nothing left to sell, no house, no car. She ended up living with her daughter in a tiny apartment, while her son continued to spiral. I felt a chill. It was like hearing a premonition of my own future. What happened to him after he left here? He entered a rehab program. He's been clean for 8 months. But you know what he told me when he came in for a follow-up? That he only started taking recovery seriously when he realized no one else was going to pay for his mistakes. Her words stayed with me for the rest of the shift. When I finally left the hospital, 36 hours later, I had made a decision. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. At home, I found Ethan alone, watching television in the living room. The house was still a mess, dirty dishes in the sink, clothes thrown about. He hadn't even bothered to clean up. "Chloe didn't come back?" I asked, dropping my bag on the sofa. "No," he replied, without taking his eyes off the TV. "She said she's only coming back when I fix the situation. Like it's easy." I turned off the television, forcing him to look at me. "We need to talk." He sighed, irritated by the interruption of his apparent lethargy. "If this is about last night, Mom, I already told you I have no way to pay that money right now." "It's not about the money, Ethan. It's about you, about your problem with gambling." His face hardened. "I don't have a problem. I just had some bad luck. $150,000 in debt isn't bad luck, son. It's an addiction." He stood up, defensive. "Look, if you came here to give me a sermon, I'm here to offer you a choice," I interrupted. "A single opportunity." That got his attention. He fell silent, waiting for me to continue. Option 1. You seek treatment for your gambling addiction. You find a job, any job, and you start paying off your debts on your own. I will allow you to stay here for 3 months, without Chloe, while you get reorganized. And option 2? He asked, suspicious. You're out in 30 days, as stated in the notice, and you solve your problems alone, without my help, without my money, without my roof. That's not a fair choice, he protested. How am I supposed to pay off $150,000 working where? Pumping gas? I don't know, Ethan. But I do know that I am not selling my house to pay off gambling debts. Nor am I compromising my retirement for someone who isn't willing to help himself. He looked at me incredulous. You're talking like I'm just anyone. I'm your son. Yes, you are. And because you're my son, you owe me more than lies and manipulation. I kept my voice firm, even though my heart was breaking. Think about your options. I want an answer tomorrow. I went up to my room, closing the door behind me. I heard Ethan shout something downstairs, followed by the sound of glass breaking. I didn't go down to check. I was setting boundaries for the first time in decades, and it wasn't going to be easy for either of us. That night, as I tried to sleep, I remembered Ethan as a little boy. The boy who would run into my arms during thunderstorms, who made me Mother's Day cards with shaky letters, who looked at me with admiration when I came home from the hospital in my white uniform. Where was that boy now? Lost in bets and lies, in plans to take what was mine, in yellow sticky notes on a refrigerator. The tears came silently, soaking my pillow. I cried not just for the son I was losing, but for the mother I had been. Too permissive, too blind, always ready to sacrifice everything for someone who didn't value those sacrifices. But at dawn, as the first rays of sun came through the window, I felt a strange peace. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt I was doing the right thing, not just for me, but for Ethan, too. A week passed since the night I gave Ethan his options. 7 days of almost unbearable tension, where we coexisted in the same house like polite strangers. He didn't give me his answer the next day, as I had asked, or the day after. The silence stretched on, broken only by occasional greetings when we passed each other in the house. Chloe did not return. I learned from Ethan that she was at her parents' house, waiting for things to be resolved. I translated that mentally, waiting for me to cave, as I always had. On the 8th day, a rainy Thursday, I came home from my shift to find Ethan sitting at the kitchen table. In front of him was a manila envelope and a cup of coffee. He looked like he had aged years in just 1 week, deep dark circles, an unshaven beard, his shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of his choices. "Mom," he said when he saw me, his voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" I nodded, hanging my wet coat on the hook by the door. I poured myself some coffee and sat down across from him. "I called some rehab clinics," he began, pushing the envelope toward me. "This one up in Wisconsin has a specific program for gambling addicts. 28 days inpatient, then outpatient follow-up." I opened the envelope, surprised. Inside were brochures and forms from a reputable clinic specializing in addiction. It wasn't cheap. The treatment cost nearly $20,000, a considerable sum, but not impossible. "How do you intend to pay for this?" I asked, scanning the documents. "I sold my car." He avoided my gaze. "It didn't cover all of it, but I made an arrangement to pay the rest in installments." The surprise must have been obvious on my face, because he added quickly, "I know it doesn't seem like much compared to what I owe, but it's a start." And he hesitated. "I also applied for some jobs. Nothing great, but they're honest jobs." I studied my son's face, searching for signs of manipulation, the same act he used to pull as a child to get what he wanted. But what I saw was something different. Genuine shame, regret, and maybe, just maybe, the first glimmer of responsibility. "When do you start?" I asked finally. "If you agree to option 1, letting me stay for 3 months while I get reorganized, I can check into the clinic on Monday." "And Chloe?" His face contorted in a pained expression. "We're done. Or rather, she's done with me. When she found out I'd sold the car, she said she wouldn't stick around with a loser with no prospects." I felt a pang of compassion, quickly followed by a thought that shamed me. "Good riddance," as my grandmother would have said. "I'm sorry," I said anyway, because it was my son who was hurting, regardless of the circumstances. He shrugged, trying to look indifferent, but I saw the pain in his eyes. Maybe it's for the best. She never really loved me, just what I could provide, or what she thought I could. And your debts? They're still there, he sighed. But I spoke to a lawyer who specializes in gambling debt. He said we can negotiate with the legitimate creditors. As for the others, it will be more complicated, but not impossible. I nodded slowly. It was more initiative than he had shown in years. And as for the money you owe me? Ethan swallowed hard. I want to pay you back too, Mom. Not now, obviously, but eventually. The lawyer suggested including it in the payment plan after the more urgent debts are under control. I took a sip of my now lukewarm coffee, pondering. A part of me, the wounded mother, the betrayed woman, wanted to stay harsh, to demand everything at once. But another part, the nurse who had seen so many people struggle to recover, recognized the signs of someone genuinely trying to change. 3 months, I said finally. You can stay for 3 months, while you do the treatment and find a job. But there are conditions. What are they? He seemed relieved, almost hopeful. First, no Chloe here, no visits. He nodded quickly. Not a problem. Second, you will contribute to the household expenses, no matter how small the amount is at first. Fair. Third, Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice a week, no skipping. He hesitated briefly, but agreed. Okay. And finally, I continued, I want to see your bank statements every month. Any sign of betting, any cent spent on gambling, and the deal is off. Ethan took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. I agree to all of it. And there's one more thing. I raised my eyebrows, waiting. I wanted. He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. I wanted to apologize. Not just for the debts or the plans with Chloe, but for everything. For being an ungrateful son, for letting her put labels on your food, for forgetting everything you did for me. I stayed silent, letting him continue. When Dad died, you could have sent me to Grandma's, fixed your life, moved on. But you worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night for years, all so I could have a good life. His voice broke. And how did I repay you? By bringing a woman into your home who disrespected you, by planning to sell the roof you built, by being a monster. Tears were streaming freely down his face now. Not the manipulative tears I had seen so many times, but the genuine sobs of someone confronting the truth about himself. I don't know if you can forgive me, he continued, or if I deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that I am truly sorry, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the son you deserve. Something broke inside me, not from pain, but from relief. Like a wound finally being cleaned after being infected for so long. Ethan, I said softly, I don't want the rest of your life. I just want you to build a life for yourself. An honest, responsible, worthy life. That will be reward enough for me. He nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his hands, just like he did when he was a boy. I'm going to do it, Mom. I promise you. Don't promise me, I replied, standing up. Promise yourself. In the days that followed, I watched Ethan mobilize like never before. He arranged his admission to the clinic, went to job interviews, and attended his first Gamblers Anonymous meeting. It was strange to see him take on responsibilities he had avoided for so long. A part of me expected it to be just a phase, that he would soon revert to his old habits. But another part, perhaps the part that never stopped believing in him, began to nurture a faint hope. The morning he left for the clinic in Wisconsin, I helped him pack a small bag. Basic clothes, toiletries, a few books he liked. He looked so vulnerable, so young again, that I had to fight the urge to say, don't go, stay, we'll figure it out another way. But I knew there was no other way. Some paths need to be walked alone, however painful. Are you sure you don't want me to drive you? I asked as he zipped the bag. I'm sure. I need to do this myself. He hesitated before adding, but thank you for offering. When the taxi arrived, I walked him to the door. Impulsively, he hugged me a tight, desperate hug, as if he were holding on to keep from sinking. I'm going to make you proud of me, Mom, he mumbled into my hair. I know, I replied, and I realized I truly believed it. After he left, I went back to the kitchen and looked at the 2 refrigerators, side by side. Chloe's, still full of expensive products, now slowly spoiling. Mine, with basic foods, some still bearing the yellow sticky notes. On impulse, I opened Chloe's fridge and started pulling everything out. Imported cheeses, expensive wines, gourmet yogurts. I separated what was still good and could be donated. I threw away what had already spoiled. Then, I took a knife and began to scrape the yellow labels off my own refrigerator, one by one. Each label removed felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. When I finished, I looked at the small pile of yellow paper in my hand, physical symbols of the disrespect I had tolerated for so long. I walked out to the backyard, took a match, and burned them all in a small metal can. As the flames consumed that bright yellow, I felt a strange sensation spread through my chest, a mixture of relief, determination, and, surprisingly, hope. There, watching the labels turn to ash, I understood that this wasn't just the story of an ungrateful son or a manipulative daughter-in-law. It was the story of a woman learning, at 65 years old, that respect is not begged for, it is demanded. And that sometimes the deepest love we can show is to set firm boundaries even when it hurts, even when it's hard, even when everything in us wants to cave. The 28 days Ethan was at the rehab clinic in Wisconsin passed more quickly than I imagined. Without him and Chloe in the house, I rediscovered the pleasure of silence, the peace of living at my own pace. For the first time in years, the house was truly mine, no labels, no tension, no constant feeling of being judged in my own space. I took the opportunity to make changes I had wanted for a long time. I painted the living room a soft shade of sage green, so different from the bland beige Chloe had insisted was more elegant. I rearranged the furniture, donated clothes I no longer wore, and planted new flowers in the garden. Small acts of reclamation that gave me back control not only of the physical space but of my own life. At the hospital, my colleagues noticed the change. "You're glowing, Eleanor," Carol commented during a break. "What happened?" "I'm learning to put myself first," I replied, surprising myself with the simplicity and depth of that statement. Visits to the clinic were only allowed on Sundays. On the first one, I was shocked by Ethan's appearance, pale, with deep dark circles, trembling slightly. Gambling withdrawal, his therapist explained to me, can be just as physical as withdrawal from any substance. "It's like my brain is screaming for that adrenaline rush," Ethan confessed during our supervised conversation. I never realized how addicted I was until I tried to stop. In the following visits, I saw gradual improvements. His skin regained color, the tremor lessened, and his eyes regained some of their light. More importantly, he began to talk about his problem with more clarity, without the excuses and rationalizations of before. "The therapist says I use gambling to escape," he explained on our third visit. "Escape from expectations, from responsibility, from the fear of not being good enough." "Fear of not being good enough for whom?" I asked. He hesitated. "For you, mostly." That hit me like a punch to the gut. "Ethan, I never. It's not something you did consciously, Mom," he interrupted gently. "It's just, you were always so competent, so strong. Head nurse, single mother, homeowner. It felt like I could never measure up to that." "I never wanted you to feel that way," I murmured, realizing how my own actions, however well-intentioned, had contributed to his insecurities. "I know, and I'm not blaming you. It's just an explanation, not an excuse." He smiled slightly. "I'm learning to tell the difference." In his last week at the clinic, Ethan gave me surprising news. He had found a job. It was nothing grand, an admin assistant at a small logistics company in Wisconsin, but it was a start, a steady salary, a chance to rebuild. "I start as soon as I get out of here," he said, obviously proud. "It's not much, but it's enough to contribute to the house expenses and start negotiating my debts." On the day of his discharge, I went to pick him up. When he got in the car, he looked like a different person, not just physically recovered, but with a different presence, more centered, more mature. "Thanks for coming," he said, buckling his seatbelt. "Of course I'd come." "No, Mom. Thank you for coming when I really needed you. For not giving up on me." I smiled, starting the engine. "We're family, Ethan. Real family doesn't give up. Even after everything I did, especially after everything you did." I glanced at him briefly before turning my attention back to the road, because now we know exactly where our boundaries are. The reintegration was not easy. Despite the intensive treatment, Ethan still faced temptation daily. He installed blockers on his phone to prevent access to gambling sites. He gave me his credit card to hold on to. He religiously attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice a week. And there were the debts, a seemingly insurmountable mountain. The gambling debt lawyer managed to negotiate with the official creditors, banks, finance companies, credit cards. The payments were reduced and stretched out over years, but they were manageable with his new salary, as long as he lived frugally. The unofficial creditors, loan sharks, underground betting houses were more complicated. Some accepted settlements through legal intermediaries. Others made threats. One particularly tense night, we received an intimidating visit from two men demanding immediate payment. "You have 1 week," the taller one said, looking around the living room as if assessing what he could take. "Or we'll be back to collect what we're owed, with interest." After they left, Ethan was pale, trembling like he had in the first days at the clinic. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I never wanted to bring this danger to you." That same night, I called Arthur, the lawyer who had helped me with the eviction notice. "I need your help with a more serious problem," I explained, recounting the intimidating visit. 2 days later, Arthur and a private investigator who worked with him attended a meeting with the men who had threatened us. I don't know exactly what was said, but they never came back. Arthur only commented enigmatically, "Sometimes the threat of public exposure is more effective than anything else for certain types of businesses." The months passed. Ethan kept his job, contributed to the expenses, attended his meetings. Slowly, I saw my son re-emerge as the man I always hoped he would become: responsible, aware, mature. Chloe tried to come back once when she heard Ethan was employed and getting organized. She showed up at the house one Sunday afternoon, all smiles and rehearsed apologies. "I was hasty," she said, standing on the doorstep. "All couples go through difficulties, don't they?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the attraction he still felt, the temptation to return to what was familiar, however toxic. "Chloe," he said finally, "you put yellow sticky notes on my mother's food. You planned to sell her house without her knowledge. You called me a loser when I needed support the most." He shook his head. "There's no coming back from that." She switched tactics instantly. The smile vanished, replaced by a hard expression. "You think you're going to find someone better than me? An admin assistant with $150,000 in debt? I don't know what I'm going to find, but I know what I no longer want in my life." He closed the door gently but firmly. Later that night, I found Ethan in the backyard, looking at the stars. I sat next to him on the bench Richard had built so many years ago. "Are you okay?" I asked, offering him a cup of tea. Strangely, "I am." He accepted the drink, his fingers brushing mine. For a moment, when I saw her, all those feelings came back. Not love, but familiarity. Like a song you don't like, but you know all the words by heart. "I understand. You know what I realized, Mom? That I'm no longer willing to trade respect for familiarity. Not for me, and not for you." I looked at my son under the silvery moonlight, noticing the firm line of his jaw, the new dignity in his eyes, and I felt a surge of pride not for something I had done, but for the man he was choosing to become. "The 3 months are up next week," I commented casually, although we were both well aware of the date. Ethan nodded. "I've already started looking for a place. There's a guy from GA who needs someone to share the rent in Wisconsin. You don't have to go, you know." The words slipped out before I could stop them. He smiled. "Yes, I do, Mom. Not because you don't want me here, but because it's time. In fact, it's long past time." We sat in silence for a moment, drinking our tea, contemplating the starry sky. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have finally found a true equilibrium. "Thank you," he said finally. "For what?" "For letting me fall. It was the only way I could learn to get back up." A year has passed since Ethan moved out. He didn't go far, just to a modest apartment about 20 minutes away that he shares with his colleague from GA. We maintain a routine: dinners on Sundays at my house, calls during the week, occasional texts just to say hello. This new dynamic has brought us closer than when we lived under the same roof. Without the pressures of daily coexistence, without the tensions built up over years of unmet expectations, we are rediscovering each other as adults. Me as a woman beyond the role of mother, Him as a man beyond the role of the problem son. Today is a different Sunday. Ethan is coming for our usual dinner, but this time he's bringing someone. A friend, he said on the phone, in a tone that suggested more than that. It's the first time he's mentioned a woman since Chloe, and I can't deny I feel a certain apprehension. I prepare the house carefully, not excessively, so as not to seem like I'm trying to impress, but enough to show I value the occasion. I make lasagna, Ethan's favorite since childhood, and a fresh salad with vegetables from my own garden, which has become my refuge in these months of rediscovery. At 6 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rings. Ethan was never punctual until recently, another small sign of his transformation. When I open the door, I see my son smiling, a bottle of wine in his hand, and beside him, a middle-aged woman with short brown hair and a shy smile. "Mom, this is Claire," he says with a quiet pride in his voice. "Claire, my mother, Eleanor." "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," Claire says, extending her hand. Her handshake is firm, her eyes meeting mine without hesitation. "Ethan talks about you a lot." "I hope good things," I reply, inviting them in. "The best," she assures me, handing me a small vase of violets. "I heard you like plants." The dinner flows with a naturalness that surprises me. Claire is not what I expected, not too young, not dazzled by appearances like Chloe. She is 42 years old. She's a high school history teacher, divorced, no children. She met Ethan at a book club at the public library 6 months ago. He was reading The Old Man and the Sea, she recounts, looking at him fondly. I found it interesting to see a man his age so engrossed in Hemingway. Usually, I only see that in my students when I force them to read it. Ethan laughs. It was part of my therapy. Reading stories about perseverance, about fighting on even when all seems lost. I observe their interaction throughout dinner. The way he looks at her, not with that desperate dependence he had with Chloe, but with respect and admiration. The way she listens to him when he speaks, attentive and present. They are small, subtle gestures, but they reveal something that brings me profound relief, a relationship built on a healthy foundation. When we serve dessert, an apple pie I made this morning, Claire asks about my work at the hospital. It's the first time in years anyone has shown genuine interest in what I do. Chloe never asked. She always diverted the topic back to herself at the slightest sign the conversation might not revolve around her. "Ethan mentioned you're thinking about retiring," Claire comments as we savor our coffee. "I'm considering it, I admit. After 40 years, my body is starting to complain about the long shifts." "And what do you plan to do after?" She seems genuinely curious. The question takes me by surprise. I've been so focused on surviving, on working, on caring for others, that I've barely stopped to think about what I really want for myself. "I'm not sure," I answer honestly. "Maybe travel a bit. There are so many places I've never seen." "My mom always dreamed of seeing southern Italy," Ethan chimes in. "Her grandparents' homeland." "Really?" Claire lights up. "I lived in Naples for 2 years when I was doing my master's degree. It's absolutely wonderful." She begins to describe the small villages by the sea, the incomparable taste of the homemade food, the warm hospitality of the Italians. Her eyes shine as she recalls her experiences, and I find myself captured by her stories, imagining myself walking those cobblestone streets she describes so fondly. "You should go," she says finally. "If there's one dream worth fulfilling after a lifetime of work, it's that one." In that moment, something crystallizes inside me, a certainty that it's time to live for myself. Not selfishly or neglectfully, but in the fullest sense of self-care and self-realization. Later, as Ethan and Claire are about to leave, my son hugs me tighter than usual. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. It was perfect." Claire is special. I can't find better words, but he understands. Yes, she is. He smiles, and I see something in that smile I haven't seen in a long time. Peace. And you know what else she is? Someone who wouldn't mind at all sharing her apartment with me. No yellow labels, no power games, just partnership. That's wonderful, Ethan. It's different from anything I've ever known. He hesitates. "In fact, I came here today not just to introduce you, but also to tell you some news. I got promoted. Nothing extraordinary, just team coordinator for the admin department, but it means a better salary. I'm so proud of you. And it means I can start paying you back. For real. I frown, confused. Paying me back? The loan money. He pulls an envelope from his pocket. It's the first of many. It's not much, but it's a start. I look at the envelope, feeling a lump in my throat. Not because of the value, which I know is modest, but because of the symbolism of that gesture. The promise fulfilled, the responsibility assumed, the respect shown not through words, but through concrete actions. Son, this can wait, I say, touching his arm. You have other priorities now. No, Mom. His tone is gentle but firm. This is a priority. It always will be. Because it's not just about money. It's about honoring my word. It's about showing you every day that your sacrifice was not in vain. I accept the envelope, recognizing the importance of this moment for his recovery and for our relationship. After they leave, I sit on the porch with a glass of wine, contemplating the night sky. I think about how life turns, how from a painful situation like the labels on the fridge, a complete transformation in our family dynamic emerged. I open the envelope Ethan gave me. Inside, besides the modest check, is a handwritten note, the first of many. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. I love you, Mom. The tears come, silent but liberating. They aren't tears of sadness or even pure joy. They are tears of recognition of the long, arduous path we walked, of the wounds that are still healing, of the new and promising journey that lies ahead. That night, I make 2 decisions. First, on Monday, I will talk to my boss at the hospital about my retirement. 40 years is enough. It's time to live the years I have left fully. Second, I will use part of the money I've saved to fulfill my dream of seeing Italy, not because I deserve a reward after everything I've been through, but because I finally understand that caring for others begins with caring for oneself. And as I put Ethan's note in my memory box, I feel an unexpected gratitude for those yellow sticky notes on the refrigerator. They were painful, humiliating, cruel, but they were also the catalyst that woke me up, that forced me to set boundaries, that transformed not only my son, but myself. Sometimes it's the biggest wounds that provoke the deepest transformations. And sometimes it's necessary to endure the bitter taste of disrespect to rediscover the sweet taste of true love, the kind that doesn't smother, control, or diminish, but rather elevates, liberates, and dignifies. 3 years have passed since the dinner where Ethan introduced me to Claire. Time runs differently now that I'm retired, no longer measured in shifts or emergencies, but in small daily pleasures and meaningful moments. Ethan and Claire got married 1 year ago in a simple ceremony in her backyard in Wisconsin. Nothing flashy, just a few close friends, homemade food, and ambient music. So different from the life he led with Chloe, focused on appearances and status. I went to Italy, as I had promised myself. I spent 2 months exploring small villages on the Amalfi Coast, visiting my grandparents' homeland in Calabria, getting lost in the alleys of Naples. I traveled alone, something I never imagined I'd have the courage to do. I discovered an independence I didn't know I had, an ability to navigate foreign lands, to communicate even with my limited Italian, to make fleeting but significant friendships. When I returned, I felt renewed, as if I had left behind not just a country, but also old patterns and expectations. The house seemed different, no longer a space for battles over territory or respect, but a quiet refuge where I could simply be Eleanor, not just the nurse, not just the mother, but a complete woman in her complexities and desires. Today is a special day. Ethan and Claire are coming for lunch, as they regularly do on Sundays, but this time they're bringing news. They didn't tell me what it is, only that it's important, and they wanted to tell me in person. I prepare a simple but careful meal. Mushroom risotto, green salad, homemade bread I learned to make after retiring. I set the table with care, place fresh flowers from the garden, in the center small rituals I've learned to value, that transform the everyday into a celebration. When they arrive, I immediately sense something different. There's an almost palpable energy between them, a sparkle in their eyes, hands that find and squeeze each other in silent complicity. After the initial hugs and routine questions about how we are, we sit down to lunch. The conversation flows naturally about work, books, news. Ethan talks about a specialization course in management he recently started. Claire comments on her students and an oral history project she's developing at the school. It's only when we serve dessert, a lemon tart that Claire brought, that Ethan finally clears his throat, a nervous gesture I've known since his adolescence. "Mom," he begins, holding Claire's hand on the table. "We have some news to share." My heart speeds up. There's something in the way they look at each other that tells me exactly what's coming next. "We're expecting a baby," Claire announces, her voice soft but firm. 3 months along. The joy I feel is immediate and overwhelming. Tears spring up before I can stop them. "A baby," I repeat, as if I need to hear the words in my own voice to believe it. "Yes," Ethan confirms, his face lit up in a way I've never seen before. "You're going to be a grandmother, Mom." A grandmother. The word resonates within me, opening up possibilities I had never considered. After so long being just a mother, the provider, the caregiver, the one setting limits, I would now have a new role to play. "It's a girl," Claire adds, gently placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "We found out last week." "A girl," I repeat, marveling. I stand up to hug them both, feeling a connection to the future I hadn't expected to experience at this stage of my life. After the initial excitement calms down, Ethan looks at Claire, as if silently asking for permission to say something else. She nods discreetly. "Mom," he says, "we'd like to ask you something." "Of course, anything." We decided to name her Eleanor. His voice is thick with emotion. "If that's okay with you, we want her to have your name." The world seems to stop for an instant. Of all the honors I've received in my life awards at the hospital, professional recognitions, none compares to this. My name, continuing on through a new life. A new Eleanor who will come into the world under such different circumstances than the ones I faced. "It would be the greatest honor of my life," I managed to say finally. Later, as we're having coffee on the porch, Ethan hands me a small package. "What's this?" I ask, surprised. "Something I want you to have before little Eleanor arrives." I open the package carefully. Inside is a beautifully carved wooden box. Opening it, I find something that makes my heart stop for a second. The loan agreement I made with Ethan years ago, stamped with "paid in full" in red ink. "How?" I whisper, tracing my fingers over the document. "I thought it would still take years. I sold some things, worked extra hours, saved every possible cent," he explains. "I wanted this settled before I became a father. I wanted to start this new phase with no debts from the past." I examine the contract, noticing the attached receipts, the regular transfers over the last 3 years. Ethan not only kept his promise, he prioritized this commitment above comforts and luxuries. "I don't know what to say," I admit, moved. "You don't have to say anything." He smiles. "I just wanted you to know that the lesson you taught me about respect, responsibility, consequences is the same one I intend to pass on to my daughter." Claire, who had been watching the scene in silence, adds softly, "Ethan told me the whole story. The labels on the fridge, Chloe, the gambling debts, all of it. And you didn't run screaming?" I joke, trying to lighten the intensity of the moment. On the contrary, she looks at Ethan with love. I fell in love with this man precisely because of his honesty, because of his ability to own his mistakes and work to fix them. It's not the past that defines a person, but what they choose to do with the lessons learned. Her words resonate in my mind, crystallizing something I've felt but never fully articulated: the transformative value of boundaries. As a mother, my greatest act of love wasn't when I caved, when I sacrificed everything, when I ignored faults for fear of hurting. It was when I said enough, when I established clear consequences, when I demanded respect not just for me, but for Ethan himself, for the man I knew he could become. Months later, I'm in the hospital waiting room this time, not as a nurse, but as an anxious grandmother. Claire's labor began early this morning, and Ethan has been by her side ever since. I pace back and forth, remembering so many other waiting rooms, so many other births I attended professionally. But nothing prepared me for this experience, this mix of anxiety, joy, and a strange feeling of continuity. When Ethan finally appears in the hallway, his face reveals everything before the words even come out. "She's here," he announces, his voice choked. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect." I'm led to the room where Claire is resting, exhausted but radiant, with a small bundle in her arms. As I approach, she lifts the baby slightly toward me. "Eleanor," she says softly. "Meet your grandmother, Eleanor." I take that tiny being into my arms, observing the still undefined features that will one day transform into a unique face. Her little eyes open for an instant, as if trying to recognize me, and I feel an instant connection not just to this new life, but to all the generations that came before and all those that will come after. "Hello, little Eleanor," I whisper. "Welcome to the world." Ethan puts his arm around my shoulders. "She's going to have a different life," he says, more to himself than to me. "No labels, no power games, no disrespect. I'll make sure of it." "I know you will," I reply, holding his free hand. In that moment, contemplating 3 generations gathered in that hospital room, I understand that the cycle has been broken, that from a situation of disrespect and humiliation, not only was a transformed man born, but also the promise of a different future for this little girl now sleeping in my arms. And I think, with a mixture of irony and gratitude, that it all started with yellow sticky notes on a refrigerator. How can the most insignificant moments trigger the most profound transformations? How sometimes we need to lose something: dignity, comfort, security to regain something far more valuable: our self-worth, our ability to set boundaries, our courage to demand respect. I look at little Eleanor and make a silent promise. She will grow up knowing her value. She will know the story of her grandmother, of her father, of the journey that brought us here. She will learn that love doesn't mean allowing everything, that true family is built on mutual respect, and that sometimes the bravest act we can perform is to simply say, "No more." From now on, things will be different. Because, in the end, it's not the labels on the refrigerators that define who we are. It's how we respond to them that reveals our true strength. Now, if you like this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left your jaw on the floor. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos I don't upload here. I'll see you there.